Hi, guys, and welcome. Today, I am doing something a little bit different. I am going to give you a very, very short lecture on psychoanalytic theory and psychodynamic theory. And the reason why I am doing this is because a lot of students have reached out to me and said that there's some confusion about what is psychoanalysis versus psychodynamic. And I understand why that can be confusing because some articles and even some books use these terms interchangeably, psychoanalytic or psychodynamic. So I am going to give you a very, very condensed overview to help you understand. And I'm going to present it to you in a form of a PowerPoint. So stay tuned. Okay, welcome. Let's get started. This is actually the second time that I am recording this PowerPoint presentation because I made a mistake and I skipped a slide. So we are going to start talking about psychoanalysis and psychodynamic theories. Again, I can see how people confuse the two because they are used interchangeably in a lot of articles. This is a very condensed PowerPoint presentation and it is just giving you an overview. In the future, I will do more videos that will explain different theories in more detail. To understand psychoanalysis, we must give credit to the person that started psychoanalysis, and we must talk about what are some basic assumptions that underlie the psychoanalytic theory. So look to the right, that is Freud. Sigmund Freud developed the psychoanalytic process of therapy in 1896. Freud rejected the idea of religion and spirituality. He was not a very religious person. In fact, he was very critical of religion. He believes that religion should be separate from research and psychological studies. He was quoted as saying, "The religions of mankind must be classed among the mass delusions of this kind. No one, needless to say, who shares a delusion ever recognizes it as such." He is saying that religion is agreed upon by the masses and therefore they don't recognize it as a mass delusion. Although Freud was not spiritual or religious, he believed that dreams have meanings and possibly manifest our innermost desires. In the psychoanalytic therapy session, the therapist, psychologist, or practitioner is the expert in the room and they are treating the patient. They are helping the patient to come to terms with some things that may be lying dormant in their mind. Don't confuse Freud with Carl Rogers or any of the more recent theorists that suggest that the therapeutic relationship should be warm and comfortable and empathetic. Freud did not view the therapeutic relationship in that way. The therapeutic relationship is important, but the therapist does not self-disclose. The therapist does not get close to the client and try to form deep emotional connections. In fact, Freud believed that the patient should not even face the therapist. So during the process, most people laid on a couch or sat on a chair that was positioned in a way that they were not actually looking at Sigmund Freud. So let's talk about some basic assumptions that underlie the psychoanalytic theory. So one basic assumption that is very, very important because it is the foundation of psychodynamic therapy and theories as well. There are different levels of consciousness. This was proposed by Freud and it is widely accepted today that we have a conscious part of our mind, we have a pre-conscious part of our mind, and we have something that is unconscious, which are thoughts, memories, and feelings that are hidden. The practitioner can help the patient unearth unconscious thoughts through the process of psychoanalysis. So understand that the process of psychoanalysis is the approach to therapy. The type of therapy that you are doing when you do this is called psychoanalytic. So you're doing psychoanalytic therapy. In this process, thoughts, memories, and desires are driving many of our behavioral patterns, but they exist in the subconscious part of the mind or the part of the mind that is not accessible. So the therapist's job is to help a patient access some of that subconscious stuff that's driving behavior. Although Freud is not religious, he believed in free association and dream interpretation or dream analysis. So he believes that if you ask a patient to say whatever comes to his or her mind, no matter how trivial and no matter how repulsive it is, the therapist can listen and can start to connect the dots and help the patient also to see what's in the subconscious mind. So free association is when they are prompted to just say whatever comes to their mind. Dream analysis or dream interpretation is when the patient lays back and tries to recall all the elements of the dream. It is believed that the dream is somehow a manifestation of our hidden desires. And you may think to yourself, how is that possible? When I had a nightmare, and in my nightmare, I was trapped. Well, in that may be disguised the desire to be free. And so Freud was really big on dream interpretation and free association. So in the analytic therapy process, you're going to be looking at these kind of things. Some Freud's theory is still very popular today. A lot of us clinicians, we accept that we have a conscious mind, a preconscious mind, and an unconscious mind. If you look at this picture, you see an iceberg. Some people like to use this picture where it shows the conscious mind is being illuminated by the sunlight, and you can see that that conscious mind is the part of the mind that you are presently aware of. So what are you doing right now? What are you wearing right now? How do you feel right now? It is accessible. It's in your conscious mind. It's right there in the present moment. Your preconscious mind contains information that is accessible, but it's not right there on the surface. So I can ask you, how did you feel about your first date with your boyfriend? How did you feel about your first date? And you can access that feeling, and it is in your preconscious mind. But maybe there was some type of trauma that happened to you when you were 5, 6, or 7 years old. And that memory, along with the feelings and the physiological response, that memory is submerged under the dark, murky waters of your unconscious mind. And so this is widely accepted today. Just remember, you have these 3 parts of human consciousness. So let's talk about the assumptions about personality structure. So Freud is one of the first people to talk about the id, the ego, and the superego. The id is driven by the pleasure principle. He theorized that the id is present at birth because infants demand immediate gratification. They want to eat, they want to be held, they want to be changed, and they don't care what you are doing. They will keep crying until their needs are met. So he believes that underneath everything we have this id that is driving us, and it is more geared towards aggression, sexual drives, and things like that. So the superego, on the other hand, follows the moral principle and tries to get us to do the right thing. And this would be the equivalent of what people say our conscience is. Well, my conscience got the best of me. So Jimmy the Cricket with Pinocchio. Oh, Pinocchio, you should do the right thing. That is what the superego is. And then you have the ego, and the ego is the balancer of everything. So the ego is always trying to help balance out and figure out what is the best course of action in the moment. And so the ego sometimes may step in and say, yes, you're angry and you should fight this person. But if you fight this person, there are other consequences. So the ego is the judge, the balancer, and the id would be represented by the little devil on the shoulder, and the superego would be represented by the little angel on the shoulder, telling you what to do that will be the most positive response to the situation. So, in psychoanalytic sessions, dream analysis and free association are present. In the beginning, interpretations of dreams was considered the royal road to the unconscious. Many therapy sessions were based on the patient's dreams, which was used to reveal a person's unconscious desires. I already mentioned this, but I wanted to stress that it was so important that it was termed the royal road to the unconscious. So a lot of the sessions were spent talking about dreams. The therapist is detached and sits out of view of the patient, and barriers are allowed. In some more modern approaches to therapy, they will say never put a desk between you and a client, never put anything between you and a client because you need the client to see you. Well, that is not the case in a psychoanalytic session. The therapist is not going to disclose personal information about his or herself and will not strive for an emotional connection or sustain eye contact. It's really like the patient is supposed to be so free and so disconnected from the practitioner that they can say what comes to their mind and feel comfortable doing so. The patient is encouraged to free associate, and the patient will say the first thing that comes to his or her mind, no matter how trivial, repulsive, or unacceptable. The dream interpretation involved asking the patient what he or she dreamt the night before or a few days ago. Remember, this is a long-term therapy process. I'm not sure if I said that, but sometimes a person will come to treatment 2 to 4 times a week, and this kind of therapy could go on for 2 to 5 years. And so it's a very long-term, intense type of therapy. The content of the dream is called the manifest content. The manifested content is disguising the anxiety so that we can tolerate remembering the dream when we are awake. I know that that's a mouthful, but I will come back to that in a later video. So we're dissecting the dreams. You have manifest content, and then you have latent content. And so the therapist will work with the client or work with the patient until the patient understands that the manifest content is a reflection of the latent content, which is repressed memories, dreams, thoughts, feelings, and desires. Psychodynamic therapy. So, psychodynamic therapy is talk therapy and it encourages the exploration of childhood experiences. Psychodynamic therapy and psychoanalytic therapy are often terms that are used interchangeably, and that's why it gets confusing. It should be used separately because psychoanalytic is a specific approach and a theory developed by Sigmund Freud. Psychodynamic therapy is not psychoanalytic therapy, although they share some of the same basic assumptions. Remember that Freud's theories were psychoanalytic, whereas the term psychodynamic or neo-analytic refers to his theories and those of his followers. So he had contemporaries and psychoanalysts and psychotherapists and psychiatrists that came after him that subscribed to many of his theories, but they went a little different direction. So psychodynamic therapy finds its roots in psychoanalytic therapy, and this is a long-term therapy focused on how your childhood has impacted your current behavioral patterns. So you have to remember Freud suggested that there's some repressed stuff that is affecting how we respond to stimuli in our current state. And so psychodynamic and neo-analytic therapists believe this too. It subscribes to Freud's original theories about the unconscious. So most psychodynamic or neo-analytic theorists believe that there's an id, there's an ego, there's a superego, and that there are different levels of consciousness. Again, this is a form of talk therapy, and the therapist will work with the client throughout the session, and the client will be encouraged to talk about their early memories, thoughts, dreams, and feelings. This kind of therapy also focuses on the transference relationship. Basically, when a client takes feelings that he has or she has towards a family member or someone else and projects it onto the therapist. This is very important in a psychodynamic process because that way the therapist becomes a representation of a person or a relationship that the client is struggling with, and it can be unpacked and discussed in the therapeutic session. This is a very intense type of therapy, and the therapist is often looking at the client's body language and interpreting periods of silence and maybe even facial expressions. Neo-analytic and psychodynamic theory was spearheaded after Freud, Carl Jung, Alfred Adler, Anna Freud, who was his daughter, and Erickson are just a few that fall under this umbrella. Anna Freud followed in her father's footsteps and she became a psychoanalyst, but she suggested that the ego was formed separately from the id, and she placed more focus on the ego. She believed that the id and the ego have their own psychic energies, and at any given time, depending on the situation, either one could be active, and I actually agree with her. So, neo-analytic and psychodynamic theorists came after after Freud, but they subscribe to some of his basic assumptions. So it is a collection of individual theories that work well together and share similar beliefs. There are many neo-analytic thinkers that have contributed a great deal to the field of psychology. Neo-analytic theorists de-emphasize the psychosexual stages and believe that there is a predetermined component, but that personality develops on a continuum across a lifetime. So Carl Jung separated himself from Freud by de-emphasizing psychosexual stages, and he also focused on a whole different paradigm regarding personality. Some neo-analytic theories include ego psychology, object relation psychology, analytic psychology, and psychosocial stage development psychology. The takeaways, and I told you this would be a very short video. So, some takeaways. The psychoanalytic perspective pertains to Freud's original theories and his approach to therapy. Psychodynamic is an approach to therapy, and the theories developed after Freud but are based on many of his initial assumptions. Therapy sessions by psychoanalysts are conducted differently than those using a psychodynamic approach. Remember, the psychodynamic approach is focusing on more than just what happened in the childhood, and most psychodynamic or neo-analytic thinkers believe that we are constantly developing and our future aspirations also shape who we are, and that was proposed by Carl Jung. Psychodynamic theorists generally de-emphasize sex and pay more attention to environmental and social factors that shapes one's behavior and personality. So the psychodynamic theorists, they really thought about it in terms of nurture and nature, that there are multiple things contributing to how we are and why we do what we do. Both approaches to therapy can be traced back to Freud, and that's where the confusion comes in because, like I said, some articles will say psychodynamic and then say psychoanalytic, and they will use them interchangeably. Here's a quick little chart that I thought was useful. Maybe you could screenshot it, or maybe you can look at my reference slide and go to the website and see this chart. And it talks about the characteristics, and it names some theorists, and it breaks down some differences between psychodynamic and psychoanalytic. And I thought that this was very cool. And again, it's on my reference slide. And I think on my reference slide, it is the first one. It's the first reference. And it is, what is the difference between psychodynamic and psychoanalytic? So visit that website if you want to get this chart, or just screenshot this or take a picture with your phone. So I hope that this presentation was helpful for you. I hope that you understand, and I hope that you are gravitating towards one of the approaches. So mention in the comments if you think dreams are important. Also, how much impact do you think childhood experiences have on who we are now? Or does it matter at all? Because there are some theorists right now that say What happened to us when we were younger is not what we should focus on. We should focus on the future. Thanks.